वेलकम एवरीवन। सो आज जिस टॉपिक के बारे में हम डिस्कस करने वाले हैं दैट इज़ इकोसिस्टम। नाउ अ इकोसिस्टम कैन बी विजुअलाइज्ड एज अ फंक्शनल unit of nature, and in ecosystem we can see interaction between living organism and their interaction with the physical environment, which include temperature, air, soil and water. अब एक इकोसिस्टम का साइज वेरी करता है, राइट। वी कैन कंसिडर अ स्मॉल पॉन्ड एज वेल एज अ लार्ज फॉरेस्ट, या कोई सी हो, उसको हम इकोसिस्टम कंसिडर कर सकते हैं, राइट। क्योंकि वहाँ पर देयर इज़ इंटरेक्शन बिटवीन ऑल द लिविंग ऑर्गेनिज्म, राइट। चाहे वो एक स्मॉल एक्वेरियम हो या एक सी हो, इंटरेक्शन ऑफ ऑर्गेनिज्म विद ईच अदर इज प्रेजेंट, and the organisms they are interacting with their physical environment as well, right? So all this can be considered as an ecosystem. So ecosystem को हम broadly दो categories में divide करते हैं. First is terrestrial and the second is aquatic. तो हम जब भी terrestrial ecosystem की बात करते हैं, we can consider a forest to be a terrestrial ecosystem, a grassland to be a terrestrial ecosystem, whereas in term of aquatic, sea can be considered as an aquatic ecosystem, or a pond or any lake. All these are examples of aquatic ecosystem. Now we'll discuss about the structure and function of ecosystem, right? So basically in the last slide अभी हमने पढ़ा कि interaction of biotic and abiotic component, they result the structure of a ecosystem, and this physical structure is a characteristic feature of each ecosystem, right? So what does it mean? इसका basic simple meaning यही है कि organism के interaction से and their interaction with the physical environment से एक physical structure बनता है जो कि एक ecosystem को constitute करता है, और ये physical structure कैसा होगा, दैट डायरेक्टली डिस्क्राइब्ड व्हाट टाइप ऑफ इकोसिस्टम इट इज़, चाहे वो सी इकोसिस्टम हो, पॉन्ड हो, लेक हो, फॉरेस्ट हो, ग्रासलैंड हो, राइट। सिस्टम हैज़ वेरियस कंपोनेंट्स सच एज प्रोडक्टिविटी, decomposition, energy flow and nutrient cycling. Now moving on is the first component of ecosystem, that is productivity. So first we will discuss primary production. So primary production is basically the amount of biomass या organic matter that is produced per unit area over a time period by plants during the process of photosynthesis, right? So जितना भी biomass or we can say organic matter that is produced by the plant during photosynthesis over a time in a per unit area, right? So production includes gross primary productivity, which is simply the rate of production of organic matter. Now हम किसी भी plant species की बात करें, right? We have learned that during photosynthesis the productivity is known as gross primary productivity, right? But every plant species they use certain amount of energy, or we can say productivity, for their own growth, right? So this we will call as respiration loss. So when we subtract respiration loss from our gross primary productivity, we will get net primary productivity, and this primary productivity is the biomass that is available for the consumption of heterotrophs. Now the next term is secondary productivity. So secondary productivity is defined as the rate of formation of new organic matter by the consumers, right? So these heterotroph organism, they will consume plant, right, and they will produce new organic matter by the energy of the organic matter they have consumed from the primary productivity, right? So primary productivity, it depends upon plant species inhabiting a particular area, right? What kind of area, कैसा area है जिसमें वो plant species है, और there are variety of factors such as nutrient, photosynthetic capacity of plant, right? So हम clearly कह सकते हैं that every ecosystem has its own primary productivity. Now, in this diagram we can simply see the explanation of primary productivity, right? Here you can clearly see that gross primary production, right? And certain amount of energy in terms of joule was used by plant, cellular respiration, right? So this is respiration loss, जिसको हम कैपिटल आर से सिंबलाइज करते हैं, right? And the subtracted value, that is net primary productivity, it will consume by the heterotrophs, right? Now up the secondary productivity में same organism, it will burn certain amount of energy in terms of cellular respiration, right? And the rest energy will be converted into tissue, right, which is then consumed by the organism on the higher trophic level. Now moving on, the next is decomposition, right? So there are various organisms, what they do, they simply break down the complex organic matter into inorganic, for example say carbon dioxide and water and nutrients, right? And the process is known as the decomposition, and the organisms, they are known as decomposers. Now there are various steps in the process of decomposition, that is fragmentation, right, leaching, catabolism, humification and mineralization. Now we will first start with the fragmentation. So basically fragmentation is breaking down of detritus, right, or detritus we will say the dead organic matter into smaller particles, right? So basically name fragmentation itself suggest breakdown. So fragmentation is breaking down of detritus into smaller particles. Now the next process is leaching. So what happen in leaching is that the water soluble inorganic nutrients, right, they go down in the soil where they get absorbed in the soil, right? The next is catabolism, right? Now what happen in catabolism, that the various bacteria and fungal enzyme, they degrade that detritus, which is not water soluble, into simple inorganic substances. Now you can see here that that the green leaf, when they turned yellow, right, they falls on the ground and this leaf is eaten by some insects and other organism, right? So this is fragmentation, right? And this some nutrient which leach into the soil, this process we call as leaching. And here we can see that further decomposition by earthworm, bacteria, fungus, fungi, mites. This process was discussed as catabolism. Now moving on, the next process we known as humification. So basically humification leads to a dark colored amorphous substance which we called as humus, right? हम सब ने ही we have seen that a dark color layer on the soil, right? And जिसको हम humus कहते हैं, and this humus is the topmost layer of soil. And this humus is highly resistant to microbial action, and this undergoes decomposition at an extremely slow rate. Now the last process is mineralization. The humus is further degraded by some microbes and they release these inorganic nutrients. This process is mineralization. Now जितना भी हमारा rate of decomposition है, that is controlled by a chemical composition of detritus, right? तो जितना भी हमारा dead और decaying matter है उसका chemical composition क्या है, and the surrounding climatic factors. अगर हम particularly climatic condition को discuss करें तो we have seen that if the detritus is rich in lignin, chitin, the decomposition rate slows down. और rate of decomposition fast होता है जब भी हमारा detritus rich हो nitrogen and water soluble substance जैसे कि sugars में. Now ऐसा देखा जाता है कि warm and moist environment it favors decomposition. So we all know that sun is the only source of energy for all the ecosystem on earth, right? And out of the total sunlight that falls on the earth, less than 50% of it was used by all the ecosystem for production of biomass that we call as photosynthetically active radiation, or known as PAR. Right, we know that autotrophs, they fix sun energy to make food from simple inorganic material. The process is simply known as photosynthesis. Now the plants, they only capture only about 2 to 10% of the photosynthetically active radiation, and this only the 2 to 10% of PAR is enough to sustain the life on earth. Now there is a unidirectional flow of energy, right, from sun to producers, then to consumers, right? So the green plant, they are known as the producers, right, because they produce their own food by the process of photosynthesis. So when we talk about terrestrial ecosystem, तो एक टेरेस्ट्रियल इकोसिस्टम में हमारे मेजर प्रोड्यूसर्स दे आर हर्बेशियस एंड वुडी प्लांट्स. और जब हम बात करते हैं किसी एक्वेटिक इकोसिस्टम की, तो वेरियस स्पीशीज सच एज फाइटोप्लैंक्टन्स, एल्गी एंड हायर प्लांट्स, दे आर द प्रोड्यूसर्स. नाउ स्टार्टिंग फ्रॉम द प्लांट, और वी कैन से प्रोड्यूसर, food chain or rather food webs are formed such that an animal feed on a plant, right? That animal feeds on plant or on another animal and is turned in food for another. So the chain or web is formed because of this interdependency. Now there is interdependency among the producers and the consumers, right? So one organism, it feeds on the other and it become feed for the other organism also, right? So this is the interdependency or the chain or web we are talking about, which we call as food chain or food web. So basically no energy is trapped in an organism and remains in forever. So energy is transferred from producers to consumers, right? All animals, they depend upon plant. एंड इस डिपेंडेंसी को हम दो कैटेगरी में डिवाइड करते हैं, दैट इज़ डायरेक्टली और इनडायरेक्टली, राइट? सो ऐसे एनिमल्स विच आर डायरेक्टली डिपेंड अपॉन द प्लांट्स और इनडायरेक्टली फॉर देयर नीड्स, दे आर नोन एज consumers or heterotrophs, right? So if an animal they feed on producer, the plants, they are called as primary consumers, right? Or if an animal feeds other animal, right, which in turn eats the plant, they are called secondary consumers. The producer belong to the first trophic level. The herbivores or primary consumers, they belong to the second, whereas carnivores, which feed on secondary consumers, belong to the third trophic level. Now in this example we can clearly see, right, the first trophic level, that is the plants. It can be, when we talk about water based ecosystem, it can be phytoplankton, और जब हम टेरेस्ट्रियल इकोसिस्टम की बात करें, it can be grass, it can be trees, right? Now on primary consumer, that is second trophic level, right, it can be zooplankton if we are talking about a aquatic ecosystem, and if we are talk about a terrestrial ecosystem, it can be grasshopper or a cow, right? And the secondary consumers will be at the third trophic level. यहाँ पर birds, fishes and wolf होते हैं. And if we talk about a aquatic ecosystem, it can be a fish, that the fish feeds on zooplanktons. And if we are talking about a terrestrial ecosystem, it can be birds and wolf. Then the next come fourth trophic level, which we called as tertiary consumers, and this occupied by a man or a lion. So moving on, right, it is important to note that amount of energy it decreases as we successes the trophic levels, right? So when we move from primary producers to primary consumers to secondary consumer to tertiary consumers, the amount of energy is decreases at a successive level. So organism at each trophic level, they depend upon those at lower level for their energy demands. And we already have discussed that her trophic level per there is a certain mass of living material at a particular time, which we call as standing crop, right? So now अभी हमने जो बात करी थी that the amount of energy decreases, so यहाँ से concept आता है, that is the transfer of energy at each trophic level. Now this transfer of energy says that only 10% of the energy is transferred to each trophic level from the lower ones. Ecological pyramid. So basically हम तीन टाइप के ecological pyramids को डिस्कस करते हैं, that is pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass and pyramid of energy. Now first we can see that this is pyramid of number, right? So अब इस pyramid of number में we can clearly see that different trophic levels, they have different number of individuals. So as we move from primary producers to the primary consumers to secondary consumers to tertiary consumer, it is a general trend that number of individual they decreases. So this distribution of number of individuals at different trophic level is called as pyramid of number. Now the next is pyramid of biomass. तो जब भी we move from producers to primary consumers to secondary consumers to tertiary, right, the biomass at a particular trophic level, we can clearly see that it is decreasing as we move up, right. So this pattern shows the pyramid of biomass. Now there is a catch in the pyramid of biomass when we talk about a aquatic ecosystem, right. Now in aquatic ecosystem, it is clearly seen that the biomass of primary consumers, they are more than that of a producers, right. Now moving on, the third is pyramid of energy, right. Pyramid of energy is always unidirectional, right. Now a clear trend, we can see that only 10% of energy is being transferred at each trophic level, right. The rest is consumed by the organism at that particular trophic level. Now in most ecosystem, we have just discussed that pyramid number का हो, energy का हो या biomass का हो, they are all upright, right. And this upright means that कि सबसे ज़्यादा they are producers in case of number or biomass than the herbivores itself, right. And herbivores are more than the carnivores, right. Now abhi we have just discussed that pyramid of energy is always upright, it can never be inverted, right, because the flow of energy is unidirectional, right. Now moving on, the next topic is ecological succession. An important characteristic of all communities is that their composition and structural constantly change in response to the changing environment conditions. So हम कभी भी किसी भी इकोसिस्टम की जब बात करते हैं, it is clearly seen that एक इकोसिस्टम में environmental conditions, they are never static. So the environmental condition, they keeps on changing. So the composition and structure of ecosystem must change according to its changing environment. And जैसे ही environment change होता है, abiotic factors change होते हैं, so the organism had to adapt themselves according to the changing environment. Of this change, we have seen that it is orderly and a sequential in nature, right. So these changes, they lead finally to a community, and that community is near equilibrium with the environment, right. So they have well adapted to that change in environment, and such community we call as climax community, right. Now this gradual and predictable change in species composition with the change in environmental condition, right, is ecological succession. Now the entire sequence of communities that changes in a given area, they are called share. Succession is a process that starts in an area where there is no living organism, or somehow all the living organism are lost which were supposed to exist there, right. So the former is called primary succession and the later were we called as secondary succession.